Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we're going back in time a bit to the
Oh,
year 2003.
okay.
Yeah, to explore the state of Indigenous communities around the world.
Wow. It's so fascinating.
Yeah, it is. And to help us navigate all of this, we're going to be using the Indigenous World 2004 as our guide.
Oh,
This book is amazing. It's packed with firsthand accounts and reports from experts and activists
oh,
who
wow.
were working directly with Indigenous communities.
That sounds incredibly valuable
Yeah,
to get those perspectives.
right. And so get ready for a journey as we uncover some really eye-opening insights into the triumphs and struggles
Yeah.
of Indigenous peoples in 2003.
This book, from what I've seen, it doesn't sugarcoat anything.
No, it doesn't.
It celebrates the hard-won victories,
Mm.
but it also shines a light on the systemic issues that were, and still are in many cases,
Right.
present, and the persistent challenges faced by these communities.
Yeah, and right from the beginning, the book makes this very powerful statement. Despite some progress, the situation for many Indigenous communities was still incredibly precarious.
Makes sense.
Like every step forward could easily be reversed.
And you see that reflected in how global political events directly impacted these communities.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, think about the Bolivian crisis or the military repression happening in Burma at the
Yeah.
time, and then the just devastating conflict in Africa's Great Lakes region.
It's hard to even imagine.
Yeah, these events led to, well, loss of life, of course, but also disruption of livelihoods.
Right.
And in some cases, even threatened the very survival of entire indigenous groups.
The book also talks about the uncertainty surrounding elections
Yeah.
and political instability in places like Venezuela and the Philippines,
Right.
and how that raised fears of losing newly acquired rights.
Exactly. Progress is fragile.
It is.
And these setbacks, they're a stark reminder of that.
But amidst all of this, all this turmoil, there were some glimmers of hope.
Oh, good.
Yeah, the book talks about the peace process in Angola, which finally allowed researchers to visit and assess the needs of the San communities after over 20 years of conflict.
Wow. So they were finally able to have their voices heard.
Yeah, after all that time.
That must have been a huge step for them.
Right, it was a chance to finally start rebuilding and for people to understand what they had been through.
And speaking of voices,
Yeah.
the book itself is a testament to the diversity within the indigenous rights movement.
Oh, for sure.
You've got lawyers, social communicators, academics,
Yeah.
activists, all these different voices sharing their expertise
Yeah.
and lived experiences.
And it's powerful.
It is like a chorus of voices united in their fight for justice and equality.
Absolutely. And now the book does these really interesting deep dives into specific regions.
Oh, cool.
And honestly, some of the stories are just, well, they're mind-blowing.
I'm intrigued. Where should we start?
Let's start with the Arctic.
Okay.
One of the major themes that comes up again and again is this tension
Yeah,
between economic development and indigenous rights.
that makes sense. It's a region rich in resources, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we're talking about vast oil and gas reserve,
Yeah,
multinational corporations moving in,
I see where this is going.
and the promise of jobs and a better standard of living.
Mm.
But all of that comes at a potential cost.
Right, the environment and the traditional ways of life that depend on it.
It's that classic dilemma of progress versus preservation.
It's a tough one.
Yeah, and it's playing out right there in the Arctic.
Yeah, well, within that dilemma, you also see some inspiring stories of resilience.
Oh, yeah, like in Greenland.
Yeah, tell me about that.
So in Greenland, the Inuktitut people were really pushing for self-governance.
Okay.
They wanted economic independence, but were also dealing with the complexities of relying on Danish grants.
So a real balancing act
Yeah, they were.
between wanting control over their destiny and acknowledging the realities of their current situation. It's
Exact.
a tough spot to be in.
It is, but then there's this incredible story about the Dundas hunting area.
Oh, I don't think I've heard of that one.
So imagine being forced off your ancestral land in 1953
Oh, wow.
because of a military agreement
Yeah.
between Denmark and the U.S.
Okay.
And then 50 years later,
Wait, really?
you finally get that land back.
That's amazing.
It is. It really is. It's a testament to their unwavering determination.
After a half-century struggle, that's incredible.
Yeah, it shows you just how persistent they were in reclaiming what was rightfully theirs.
Absolutely. And that struggle for land rights echoes in other parts of the world, too.
Oh, yeah.
Like in Sápmi, which spans parts of Norway and Sweden.
Right. The book talks about the Sami people there
Yeah.
fighting for recognition of their traditional territories,
Makes sense.
especially in Sweden, where logging companies were basically encroaching on their reindeer herding lands.
I can see how that would cause conflict.
Oh, huge conflict.
Yeah.
And the frustrating thing is that despite Swedish law technically protecting Sami land rights,
Oh, wow.
the government has consistently sided with the forestry companies,
Mm.
allowing them to just deforest these areas.
Despite the impact on the Sami people.
Yeah, it's like the law is there, but the will to enforce it is just missing.
It's so disheartening, you know,
It is.
when those supposed protections just aren't there.
Yeah, and it raises an important question
Yeah.
about what traditional living even means.
Okay.
The book highlights this debate in Russia
Interesting.
about how to define traditional living for indigenous people in a world that's constantly changing.
Right. Because traditions evolve.
Yeah, exactly. And the government was trying to use this really narrow definition
Okay.
to actually limit indigenous rights, while others argued for a much broader interpretation.
It gets to the heart of how indigenous identity is perceived and valued.
Absolutely. It's a question that resonates even today as cultures evolve and adapt while also trying to hold on to their authenticity.
Yeah, it's a complex issue for sure.
It really is. Now, let's shift our focus across the Atlantic
Okay.
to North America.
Right.
The book shares a really inspiring example from Alaska about a rural development degree program
Oh.
that was specifically designed to empower indigenous leaders.
Oh, wow. That's great.
Yeah, fostering education and skills that could be passed down through generations.
That's a fantastic initiative, investing in the future like that.
Right. It's about giving them the tools to shape their own futures.
Exactly.
And speaking of shaping their own futures, the book also highlights the ongoing efforts in Canada to implement self-government agreements
Oh, interesting.
with First Nations, particularly in the Yukon.
Okay.
It mentions the Council of Yukon First Nations negotiating with the Canadian government to secure constitutional self-government status,
Wow.
building on their existing land claims agreements.
So working within the system to push for greater autonomy.
Right, exactly.
Fascinating.
But things get a little more complicated when we look at the United States.
Oh, how so?
Well, the book talks about this fight to protect sacred sites,
Okay.
with some wins, like the Salt Lake case,
Yeah.
but also ongoing battles like the one over Bear Butte Mountain.
I see. So a mixed bag.
Yeah, and then there's this persistent issue of underfunding of Native education.
Yeah, I've heard about that. That's a huge problem.
It is, and it's led to a huge gap in university graduation rates
Right.
compared to other ethnic groups.
It's a cycle of disadvantage, really.
It is, and it's made worse by the controversies surrounding the 2000 census, which significantly undercounted Native populations.
Oh, wow. So even the data is working against them.
Yeah, because that lack of accurate data then leads to even less funding for essential services.
It's like a double blow.
Right. It is. It's a reminder that even something as seemingly simple as a census can have a profound impact.
Absolutely. Data matters,
It does.
especially when it comes to allocating resources and support.
Now, if we shift our attention south
Okay.
to Mexico and Central America,
Yeah.
we encounter some pretty disturbing findings.
Oh, no.
Yeah, the book highlights the UN Special Rapporteur's report
Okay.
on human rights violations,
Oh,
especially against indigenous women.
that's all.
It is. It's a stark picture of violence, discrimination, and the urgent need for land tenure reform.
So those basic rights are being denied.
Yeah, and in Guatemala, we see that despite all the talk about inclusion,
Right.
indigenous political participation was still very limited.
Words without action.
Exactly. The book even mentions the symbolic case of discrimination brought by Rigoberta Menchutam.
Oh, wow. A Nobel Peace Prize laureate?
Yeah, who is fighting against systemic injustice.
That's really powerful that even someone of her stature
Right.
faces those barriers.
It highlights how deep-seated these issues are.
It does.
Now, in Nicaragua, they were focusing on land titling efforts
Okay.
for indigenous communities on the Atlantic coast.
Sounds promising.
It does, but the projected timeline for completion was 15 years.
Wow, that's a long time to wait for those basic rights.
It is. It's like they're being told to wait for justice, which is never an acceptable answer.
No, justice delayed is justice denied, as they say.
Exactly. And then the book takes us to Trinidad and Tobago, where we learn about the unique situation of the Santa Rosa Carib community.
Okay, what's unique about them?
Well, they actually had direct political representation,
Oh, wow.
which sounds great,
It does?
but it hadn't really translated into any meaningful improvements in their social or economic conditions.
So representation without real change.
Right. It's a cautionary tale about the limitations of representation without real action and commitment.
Absolutely. It's not enough to just have a seat at the table.
No,
You need to have a voice that's heard and acted upon.
And then we have Venezuela, where the situation was quite complex.
Oh, in what way?
Well, the book talks about this regional organization of indigenous peoples, or RPGIA,
Okay.
withdrawing its support from the government due to broken promises.
So they were holding the government accountable.
Yes, exactly. They were concerned about deteriorating living conditions and felt like their voices weren't being heard.
That takes courage to withdraw support like that.
It does. It's a powerful statement about their agency and their refusal to be silenced.
Absolutely. It shows their determination to fight for their rights and hold those in power accountable.
It really does.
So we've covered a lot of ground already.
We have.
It's clear that the situation for indigenous peoples in 2003 was incredibly diverse and complex.
It was full of contradictions and challenges, but also hope and resilience.
Definitely a lot to unpack.
For sure, a lot to unpack. Let's take a quick pause here, and when we come back, we'll continue our journey through the Indigenous World 2004, exploring more captivating stories and insights from regions across the globe.
As we go deeper into the Indigenous World 2004,
Yeah.
we see this recurring theme,
Yeah.
the fight for land rights. It connects indigenous communities
Oh, yeah.
all across South America.
It's a constant struggle.
It is.
And the book really dives into the situation in Bolivia,
Okay.
where, they had laws in place for land titling for
Yeah.
indigenous communities.
Right.
But the process was moving so slowly,
Oh, wow.
like at a snail's pace.
So the laws are there,
but
but
they're there.
the implementation is lagging.
Yeah, like the political will to really implement them was missing.
And what was causing that delay?
Well, the book points to land concentration.
Okay.
Like a small percentage of the population controlled vast amounts of land.
While indigenous and peasant farmers were struggling.
Exactly. It's this unequal distribution
Right.
that really fuels social and economic inequality.
Yeah, it creates a cycle of disadvantage.
And in Bolivia, it was made even worse by the government's push to increase gas exports and privatization.
Which, of course, indigenous groups saw as a direct threat.
Oh, absolutely. A threat to their livelihoods and self-determination.
So they weren't going to stand for it.
No, they mobilized and resisted these policies.
How so?
Well, there's this powerful image in the book
Yeah.
of indigenous communities symbolically burning government documents
Wow.
to express their outrage.
It's a strong statement
It is.
that they wouldn't be ignored.
Exactly. They weren't going to stand by and watch their rights be trampled on.
And this resistance, it continued in Brazil too, right?
Yeah. Yeah, the book talks about indigenous protests against the government's inaction on land recognition
Okay.
and development policies that were harmful to their community.
So they were fighting on multiple fronts.
Yeah, for their land, their resources, their way of life.
And were they successful?
It's a mixed bag. There were some victories, but also some heartbreaking setbacks.
Like what?
Well, the book describes this one case
Yeah.
of the illegal eviction of an indigenous community
Oh, no.
from their ancestral lands.
That's devastating.
It is. It left families vulnerable and exposed.
It's a reminder of the real human cost of these land disputes.
Yeah, people's lives are literally being uprooted.
It's a tragedy, and it highlights the urgent need to protect the rights of these communities.
Absolutely. Their right to their land and their resources.
Exactly.
Meanwhile, in Paraguay, we see the Sahayamaksa community
Okay.
fighting for the return of their ancestral land.
So they were also facing land dispossession.
Yeah, and they took their case to the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights.
Wow, so they were seeking justice on an international level.
Yeah, they were.
That shows just how far they were willing to go.
It does. Their determination was incredible.
It speaks volumes about the significance of ancestral land.
Yeah, it's not just about property.
Right.
It's about their cultural identity, their spiritual connection, their very way of life.
Absolutely. It's deeply intertwined with who they are.
And then in Argentina, we see the government trying to engage with indigenous communities on policy.
Okay, so at least there was some dialogue happening.
Yeah, they set up this working commission,
Right.
but indigenous leaders were pushing for more.
They wanted more than just incremental changes.
Yeah, they wanted a fundamental shift in the government's approach.
A real recognition of their rights and self-determination.
Exactly.
So not just a seat at the table,
Right.
but a real voice in the decisions.
A voice that would be heard and respected.
Absolutely. A voice that would shape their own destinies.
Now, across the Pacific, in New Zealand, there was a huge debate happening.
Oh, about what?
Maori rights.
Okay.
The government was pushing this really controversial foreshore and seabed policy.
And what did that entail?
Well, basically, it was like the government saying, we own all the beaches and the ocean floor.
Even though Maori have used those areas for centuries.
Exactly, for fishing, gathering, their traditional practices.
So it completely disregarded their customary rights.
Yeah, Maori groups saw it as a continuation of colonial dispossession.
So the wounds of the past were still very much present.
Oh, absolutely. It ignored their historical and spiritual connection to the land and sea.
It's a reminder of how history continues to shape the present.
Yeah, and how those past injustices can fuel present-day conflicts.
Over land, resources, and ultimately control.
And then we travel to Japan, where we see this really sensitive issue of indigenous recognition.
Okay, what happened there?
Well, the government refused to acknowledge the Ainu people as indigenous.
Really? Wow, that's a powerful statement.
It is. It speaks to the complexities of confronting historical wrongs.
And acknowledging the rights of marginalized groups.
Right. It's about recognizing their unique cultural identity and their right to exist as a distinct people.
Absolutely. It's about justice and respect.
And the book also shines a light on the human rights situation in Tibet.
Okay.
Where there were growing concerns about the suppression of Tibetan culture and religious practices.
So it's not just about land rights.
No, it's not.
It's about cultural and religious freedom as well.
Exactly. It's about protecting their entire way of life.
Their right to practice their traditions and maintain their cultural identity.
Now, moving on to the Philippines, the book explores the struggle to implement the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act.
So they had the law, but the implementation was a problem.
Yeah, bureaucratic delays, challenges in defining and representing these diverse indigenous groups.
So the system itself was creating obstacles.
Right. It was a familiar story.
Of good intentions not translating into real change.
Yeah. And then there's East Timor, a brand new democracy.
Okay.
Still dealing with the aftermath of conflict and poverty.
So they were facing a whole set of challenges.
Yeah, rebuilding their nation, establishing their own identity.
And within that, advocating for indigenous rights.
Exactly. And the book highlights the role of media.
Oh, interesting.
In promoting awareness and accountability.
So giving a voice to the voiceless.
Yeah, and it also talks about the challenges faced by local NGOs.
In a context like that, capacity building is crucial.
It is. They were trying to develop their own resources and expertise.
To effectively advocate for indigenous communities.
Right. And then we move on to Indonesia,
Okay.
where we see indigenous peoples' organizations really trying to assert their rights.
And what kind of political environment was that?
Well, it was complex, with a lot of different power dynamics at play.
So navigating those complexities to make their voices heard.
Exactly. Finding ways to work within the system while also challenging it.
And in Malaysia.
In Malaysia, indigenous communities continued to be marginalized.
Despite their long history and deep connection to the land.
Yeah, the book highlights the need for stronger legal frameworks and government support.
To protect their rights and their traditional ways of life.
It's about recognizing their inherent right to exist and thrive.
And to have a say in their own future.
Absolutely. Now, moving north to Thailand.
Okay.
We see this ongoing struggle for recognition and participation in national development policies.
So they were being excluded from those decisions.
Yeah, and the book criticizes the government's top-down approach.
How so?
Well, they imposed this master plan without any meaningful consultation with indigenous communities.
So is development imposed on them, not with them?
Exactly. It disregarded their specific needs and perspectives.
It's a classic example of one-size-fits-all development failing to recognize diversity.
And failing to respect their right to self-determination.
Right, their right to have a say in how their lands and resources are managed.
Meanwhile, in Cambodia, they were still waiting for a national policy on indigenous peoples' development.
So they had the ideas, but not the action.
Yeah, policy drafts gathering dust while communities continued to be excluded.
It's a frustrating cycle of inaction.
It is. And then in Vietnam, there was this glaring lack of specific policies and programs.
Even though they face significant challenges.
Yeah, higher poverty rates, limited opportunities, but they were invisible in the national policies.
So they were being left behind.
Yeah, basically ignored.
And what about Laos?
In Laos, the book raises concerns about the impact of opium eradication programs on indigenous communities.
I can see how that could be problematic.
It was. These programs often involved forced relocations.
Oh, wow. So they were being uprooted from their traditional lands.
Yeah, pushed into unfamiliar environments, often without adequate support.
It's a reminder that even well-intentioned policies can have unintended consequences.
especially for those who are already marginalized.
Absolutely. We need to think more holistically about the impact of our actions.
And then we return to Burma,
Oh, right.
where the book paints a really grim picture.
Of-
Ongoing human rights abuses against ethnic minorities.
That's terrible.
It is. We're talking forced labor, displacement, land confiscation, a really dire situation.
It's a stark reminder of the vulnerability of these communities.
To state violence, exploitation, and oppression.
When their lands and resources are coveted by those in power.
It's a fight for survival in many ways.
A fight against those who seek to control, exploit, and even eliminate them.
And then we journey to India,
Okay.
where the book delves into the complex situation in Nagaland.
Okay. What was happening there?
Well, indigenous communities were pushing for greater autonomy,
Makes sense.
but they faced numerous obstacles.
Right. Political roadblocks, I imagine.
Yeah, and resistance from those who benefited from the status quo.
And what about this declaration from the Charkhan Jangal Lako Andalan?
That's a movement to save the forests of Jharkhand.
Okay, what do they stand for?
They championed indigenous ownership and management of ancestral lands.
So they were challenging the existing power structures over forest management.
Exactly. They were saying, we know how to take care of these forests.
We've been doing it for generations.
And it's time for our voices to be heard.
It's a powerful statement about self-determination and their deep knowledge of their lands.
And the book also criticizes the World Bank's role
In what?
in a controversial coal mining project in Jharkhand.
So development versus indigenous rights again.
Yeah, highlighting the devastating social and environmental impacts and the lack of accountability.
It raises questions about the role of these international institutions
It does.
in perpetuating these cycles of exploitation.
And then there were these shocking incidents.
Like what?
Police firing on Adivasi protesters in Orissa
Oh, no.
who were demonstrating against mining activities.
So their peaceful protests were met with violence.
Yeah, and then there was the case of Coca-Cola contaminating groundwater in Kerala.
Wow, that's corporate negligence on a whole other level.
It is. It exposes the power imbalances.
Between corporations and these communities.
Right, and the need for greater accountability.
Absolutely. Corporations need to be held responsible for their actions.
Now, shifting our focus to the Middle East,
Okay.
we learn about this incredible story of the Mesopotamian marshes in Iraq.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about those. They were deliberately destroyed.
Yeah, by Saddam Hussein's regime.
And what happened after that?
Well, the March Arab people, they immediately began restoring this vital ecosystem.
Wow, so they were determined to bring back their land.
Yeah, it's a testament to their resilience.
And their deep connection to the land.
Absolutely. It shows that even in the face of immense destruction, hope and renewal are possible.
The beautiful story of resilience and the power of nature to heal.
And then in Israel, we see the ongoing struggle of Bedouin communities in the Negev.
Okay, what were they facing?
Well, they were facing discriminatory policies,
Like what?
forced relocation, home demolitions, and just these really inflammatory public campaigns.
So they were being marginalized and demonized.
Yeah, it was a constant battle to assert their rights and maintain their cultural identity.
Within a state that often viewed them as a threat.
Exactly. It's a reminder that indigenous communities can face discrimination even within democracies.
And that the fight for equality is a constant struggle.
It is. It requires vigilance and a willingness to speak out against injustice.
Absolutely. We can't be complacent. We need to be allies and advocates.
And finally, the book takes us to Algeria,
Okay.
where we see both progress and setbacks.
In what area?
In the recognition of indigenous rights,
Okay.
there was this symbolic granting of national language status to the Amazigh language.
So that's a positive step.
It was, but the process of inclusion was slow.
Right. So recognition doesn't always translate into meaningful change.
And we also learn about the Arch movement in Kabylia.
Oh, what were they fighting for?
They were pushing for greater autonomy and political representation.
So a desire for self-determination within the existing state structure.
Exactly. And across the border in Mali and Niger,
Yeah.
we see a growing trend towards regional self-government.
In predominantly Tuareg areas.
Yeah, it's a complex situation.
With both potential benefits and risks.
Right. It could be a step towards greater local control, but also a reflection of the weakening of central states.
And the ongoing marginalization of these communities.
So as we journey through these different regions, we see this tapestry of experiences.
Challenges, triumphs, setbacks.
Yeah, it's a reminder that the fight for indigenous rights is a global movement
With communities all over the world facing similar struggles.
demanding recognition, respect, and justice.
It's inspiring to see their resilience and determination.
It is. Their stories are powerful.
They are.
And they're not just about the past.
Right.
They're about the present and the future,
About building a more just and equitable world,
where Indigenous peoples have a voice and a place.
and where their cultures and traditions can thrive.
Absolutely. It's a fight for a better future for all of us.
So we've explored Indigenous experiences in the specific regions.
Yeah, from the Arctic to South America, across the Pacific, really all over the globe.
Right. But the Indigenous World 2004 also zooms out
Oh, okay.
to look at the broader international developments.
That we're shaping the fight for Indigenous rights.
Exactly, because it's not just local, it's global.
Right. So who are the major players on that international stage?
Well, one key figure is the UN Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples.
Okay. What do they do?
They were like a global advocate, shining a light on human rights violations affecting Indigenous communities all over the world.
So they were giving a voice to those who might not otherwise be heard.
Exactly, amplifying those concerns on a global stage.
And did they have any concrete impact?
Yeah, the book gives some specific examples from Mexico,
Okay.
where they exposed abuses and really pushed for policy changes.
That's amazing. Having that kind of international attention can really make a difference.
It does. It puts pressure on governments
Yeah.
to actually take action and address these issues.
It's about holding them accountable.
Right, to international standards of human rights.
Now, the book also talks about this ongoing debate over the UN draft declaration on the rights of Indigenous peoples.
Oh, yeah, that was a landmark document.
It was, but it sounds like it was a really long and frustrating process.
It was, with some states hesitant to fully commit to those human rights norms.
It's disheartening to see that kind of resistance, even at the global level.
It is. It shows how deeply ingrained those power imbalances are.
And how challenging it is to change those systems.
Exactly. It's not just about changing laws, it's about changing mindsets
Right. Challenging those deep-seated prejudices.
that have marginalized Indigenous peoples for centuries.
But there were also signs of hope, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Hmm?
The book highlights the work of the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues.
Okay, what did they do?
They were instrumental in raising awareness, promoting dialogue,
Yeah.
and advocating for Indigenous rights within the UN system.
So giving them a platform.
Exactly. A place where their voices could be heard.
Taken seriously.
Right? At the highest levels of international governance.
That sounds like a real step forward.
It was a recognition that Indigenous peoples have a right to participate
Yeah.
in decisions that affect their lives.
And that their perspectives are valuable.
Exactly. Essential even for building a more just and sustainable world.
Absolutely. Now, with technology rapidly transforming the world,
Yeah, the digital age was dawning.
the book mentions the World Summit on the Information Society.
Oh, right. Where Indigenous groups were pushing for equitable access to the digital world.
Yeah, but unfortunately, those concerns weren't fully addressed in the final declaration.
It's a reminder that technology, while powerful, can also exacerbate existing inequalities.
Right, if it's not accessible to everyone.
Exactly. It's about bridging that digital divide
Ensuring that everyone benefits.
from the opportunities that technology offers.
And finally, the book discusses the World Parks Congress.
Oh, yeah, that was a big one for conservation.
It was, and the focus was on the role of Indigenous peoples.
In protecting biodiversity,
Right, recognizing that they are often the best stewards of their environments.
it's a shift away from that top-down approach to conservation,
Yeah, towards a more collaborative and respectful model.
one that values traditional knowledge and empowers local communities.
So, as we wrap up our deep dive into the Indigenous World 2004,
It's quite a journey,
it has. We've covered a lot of ground.
from local struggles to global movements.
And it's clear that the fight for Indigenous rights is far from over.
But their stories, their resilience,
Yeah.
their determination,
It gives us hope
it does. It shows that change is possible.
that a more just and equitable world is within reach.
If we listen, learn, and act in solidarity with Indigenous communities.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Indigenous World 2004. We hope you've learned something new and feel inspired to continue exploring these crucial issues. We'll see you next time.